Well, good morning, everybody. I hope this Tuesday morning you found a little bit of time to kind of follow me through this forecast, because there was a few things in this that I hope you find interesting about what I think the upcoming pattern is going to continue to look like as we finish up this summer and head toward fall and build some of these new longer range ideas. We're going to talk about South America. We're going to talk about La Nina. We're going to talk about actually global wind patterns as an indicator as to where I think things are going. I'm going to give you an update on the hurricane season, and we're, of course, going to walk through our 2-week model outlook here in just a few minutes. But I was just fascinated this morning by looking at the last 24 hours of precipitation. We had very large storms that erupted in the Front Range yesterday. There's a storm complex this morning that's moving through parts of South Dakota and might be bringing some light rain into the western and northwestern Cornbelt. Again, large storms that were in parts of Montana as well. But as these storms cleared out east, again, some severe reports here as well, I was just kind of fascinated by this. I mean, this tells you exactly where the ridge is, just completely encircling this part of Texas and New Mexico and Oklahoma. And you can see it again this morning. That's where the flow pattern is really just established right now. We have these troughs that are off the west, and this ridge that's trying to open up into the midsection of the country with a little shortwave out ahead of it. That's going to be the one that initiates the storms across the northern plains, starting in Montana today, then moving east with time. And remember, there's already a leading storm complex out there. But this ridge, which has been in place, is what's driven all of the excessive heat into Texas and parts of the lower Mississippi River Valley as of late, while much cooler air has just dropped across the eastern part of the country. And again, it's this trough along which over the weekend we saw all of the severe storms that would have been on Sunday night down into this particular area. So the evolution of this pattern is really what's going to dominate the near term, and we do have, so I just think, some important evidence as we try to finish this month as to where this pattern may go into September. We're going to keep building those longer range ideas as we go throughout the rest of this week. But I mentioned the depth of that trough. There's a lot of cool air in here. Several places in the eastern Cornbelt, Great Lakes into the northeast. Last night dropped well into the 50s, some places into the 40s with relatively drier air overall. But there's already been a rebound starting in Texas, rolling back up into the northern plains, getting into Montana, where the moisture has returned, and we're already seeing the risk of those strong to severe storms again today. So this is just a quick look at the kind of pre-dawn temperatures here across a big section of the country. But I was thinking a lot about these temperatures, and I haven't shown you this map in a while, and I don't know why, but let's get into it. This is from April 1st of this year through 2 days ago. There's always a 2-day lag on the PRISM data. And what you're looking at here is growing degree day anomalies. So a growing degree day, this is a base of 86 and a base of 50 and a max of 86 in terms of temperatures. And what we're doing here is we're adding up degrees. So if you look at this map, what you'll note is how cool parts of the northern plains were, getting into parts of Minnesota and Iowa. We have, really seen a forecast bust for this summer in that area, because this was a region over which I thought we'd actually see quite a bit more heat this summer than we actually did. Remember my forecasts back in spring were hot and stormy. I got the stormy part of this right, but did not get the hot part right for this area. Other parts of the country, we were okay, but it was really this area that was a big miss on the temperatures. We can look at it another way. This is from June 1st, kind of just call it the unofficial start to summer, through yesterday, looking at ranks, temperature ranks. And we have several places here that are on the cooler side of the historical average, going back 132 years. Now, Florida's been exceptionally hot. The Southwest, especially California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and parts of New Mexico, having a top 5 or the warmest summer to this point on record. Although there has been some cooler weather coming in here and some huge storms yesterday coming through parts of Arizona. But this temperature pattern is not what I envisioned this past summer to look like. I really thought we would have much more heat in this area. And I'm just thinking about that and what that might mean going forward. Also asking the question if La Nina is actually going to be a part of this pattern as we go forward as well. So I'm still formulating these ideas for September and beyond, but I want you to kind of keep track of my thought process here as we go forward with this. Okay, one other metric I haven't shown you at all this summer is this map. I make it every day, but this is the same type of map as the GDD map, but now we're looking at what's called a stress degree day. So all we're doing here, this is coming off of some work by Elwyn Taylor. When did he do that? That was back around the drought of 2012, if I remember correctly. He did some research that looked at temperature stress is above 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And he was primarily concerned about corn in Iowa. That was where this research came from. And so if you want to know what a stress degree day is, if today's high temperature was 90 and I used a base of 86, you'd get 4 stress degree days. And his research found that in Iowa, you start to see significant yield loss when you get above 140 of these. And that's why there's this distinct green versus red, almost to pink and white coloring on this map. I make a break in the color bar right when you get to 140. And so this has been this area that has maintained for most of summer cooler conditions. Now, that does not mean we've not had warm, weeks. We had a couple of weeks in here where the temperatures really cranked, but it was not enough to offset the longer term pattern this summer of the cooler weather. Now, remember, that research was done in Iowa. So we don't usually apply it, south of this line. Let's call that I-70. It doesn't seem to apply because the planting dates are different. The maturity of the corn is different. Everything's different. So just wanted to bring this up because it is a metric that shows you where it's been exceptionally hot. Okay, we've picked up, 1,500 stress degree days almost in parts of Texas. And there are places in Minnesota and Wisconsin that haven't picked up any. That's what that white, these little white spots are representing here. These are spots that just didn't get, really didn't get hot at all this summer, save maybe a day or two. So I found this very instructive. And of course, this is having a major impact on what the crop looks like, the yield, all sorts of things. So before we even look at the precipitation side of this summer, I want to show you something. I just started in Iowa because it's what we're talking about. And I pulled up the NDVI data, and we're comparing 2023, which would be in this color, to 2024, which is here. We have the average and the black line, and the gray shading is kind of this envelope of NDVI values, from 2001 to 2021. So, for example, in Iowa, right now the NDVI values are at the highest of that distribution. Now, this isn't a comment on yield, but it's a way by which we're measuring from space how reflective the plant is in terms of bouncing red light off and near infrared light off. That's it. That's all that the NDVI is. But we have to remember that the crop was planted quite late in Iowa and also in Minnesota and parts of South Dakota and Wisconsin too, because of such heavy rain. So whereas we normally see the crop starting to change color right now and dry down, it's not yet done that, which is putting us pretty high in the distribution. But I'm just going to select, some Corn Belt states here. We include Colorado in this. Let's grab some of these eastern here. I'm going to leave the delta out of this analysis. But overall, if we look at the NDVI values for those states selected, we're just a hair above where we were a year ago in terms of the NDVI numbers. So I just think that's instructive to look at. It's another piece of information, and that's what my intent was in showing you this today. Now we go to the precipitation side of it, and this is, again, I'm going to start at April 15th or April 14th through yesterday. And what we're looking at here is precipitation ranks. And I just chose that date, again, thinking a lot about the Corn Belt. We plant very aggressively, typically around and after this date. It's all due to insurance rates or insurance time periods. And I just want to show you that much of the Red River Valley of the North, right down here to, of course, where we saw the flooding around the Big Sioux River, and then this part of the Missouri. And then earlier this year, all the tributaries leading into the Mississippi that were flooding, we can just see that there are several single-digit numbers here and several ones, meaning that since mid-April up until now, this is the wettest it's been in this region. So we have to weigh that against several things which would make us think how massive of a crop we're having and realize that some of this water was extremely damaging to the crop early. Over in Ohio, it's been very dry. West Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania, very dry. Texas, extremely wet east. But remember, we also had Beryl that came through here and soaked this after what had been an extremely wet spring in this area. Most of the high ranks you see here are late season recovery of moisture, and a lot of that came from Hurricane Debbie. And the week before that, or 10 to 15 days before that, of extremely heavy rain from the south, the flow coming around the southern edge of the Bermuda High. Out west, very hot and very dry. And we've seen a lot of course, wildfires showing up this year, being aided by the higher evaporation rates due to the heat and due to the lack of moisture. So I've really just had to step back today and look at this and try to build a story to make sure it's consistent, and also just do some verification on the preseason forecasts. So if we look at it, this is where we currently stand according to NASA on the 16-inch or 40 centimeter soil moisture percentile. So remember, when you look at this, this is not telling you the percent of the moisture. This is telling you, you can look at it more as a rank. So this is based on a comparison to historical averages. And it was interesting. I was in Indiana yesterday. I'm going back there in a little while today, up to Tipton today. And as I drove over on Interstate 74, there was a pretty remarkable change from where I live over here, just right into this area. I just saw the crop looking so much more even and quite tall here. And then as I transitioned into Indiana, you could see a few trouble spots, but nothing that I would say was alarming. I would like to head down to like Evansville, get down into this area just to see and hear from some of the folks down there if this dryness in the soil here is really causing some problems. I know I got a couple of emails yesterday about it, but I just wanted to point this out. And you stretch that into the Delta, pockets of the south and southeast. And then you just notice here, we're going to look at this again in a few moments. There are just several places that, despite this summer probably being remembered as very, very wet, we have pockets that have shown up very dry. And they're on key acres in the central plains of the United States. And I want to just make sure that these are not ignored as we go forward in our forecast. So here we are. This is this morning's run from the European Ensemble, and it's a 14-day outlook on average precipitation anomalies. And I noticed that despite the rain that's coming through South Dakota today, and that may get into parts of Minnesota and Iowa, most of our Corn Belt is forecast dry. Most of the Mid-South down into the South and lower Mississippi, River Valley dry. Texas continues to stay quite dry. And even though we have this front parked just off of the coast where it's going to be quite stormy throughout Florida, most of this rainfall is going to stay away from shore, which is why we see a big section of the southeast getting into the mid-Atlantic and the northeast forecast dry as well. But with troughs of low pressure that continue to live off the northwest coast, we're just going to kind of bring flow through. And this is going to initiate a lot of strong to severe storms, I think, starting in southern Alberta, moving through a lot of parts of Saskatchewan over into Manitoba as we go forward through the rest of this week and into this weekend. And it seems to be the pattern that's establishing itself in that area is one where strong southwest jet stream flow is just promoting a good environment to tap into some moisture and make some bigger storms. The temperature pattern's doing something like this. So again, if I could kind of trace it out, there's the trough. The big ridge that's in Texas is opening farther to the north, but there's still this deep trough that's over the east. And most of our next 5 days are reflecting that temperature pattern. But we've been discussing for quite some time now that we know that that ridge is going to open into the midsection of the country. And by the end of this week and weekend, we're going to watch temperatures, which have been very cool in this area, start to rebound up into the upper 80s and 90s while Texas hangs on to its triple-digit heat. But a much cooler bit of air coming into the Rocky Mountains. And some of the forecast models in the last 3 days have started to put down snow at the highest elevations in the Rocky Mountains. I'll show you that in a few moments here. But this is day 5 through 10, and then this continues to happen. Ready? Day 10 through 15, troughs still sweep through the same areas, meaning that this warmth that tries to build into that area that I showed you with low stress degree days, below average growing degree days, and cooler than normal temperatures this summer, went right back to it again. And that's been a bit of a frustrating point. It's just a lot of times we see some things in the models, I do at least, and I try to make sense of them. And in reality, I think persistence has won the battle here with forecasting, especially in this region of the country so far this summer. So as we get into the near-term forecast, take a look at this satellite animation. Large storms erupting here, parts of North Carolina, Virginia, right along the mid-Atlantic into the northeast. Excuse me. We did see some isolated rain that came out of some of this convection on the backside of that trough. But then watch late in the day as the storms just erupted on the Front Range. Look at all of this, stretching right back into this part of Montana. We'll talk in a moment about these wildfires, but before I get there, very, very intense storms in parts of Arizona yesterday as well that we just need to keep an eye on. Storm reports yesterday, in fact, we had a wind and hail report down here, but it was mostly here in the high plains along the Front Range, stretching all the way back into Montana. And then you can see a few isolated reports over in Virginia and North Carolina from yesterday as well. But I want to put you back in the northwest for a moment because we are keeping a close eye on these large fires in parts of Idaho and the new one down here in it's kind of the southern edges here of the Central Valley of California in this part of the Sierra Nevada. And the newest forecast for smoke continues to show that fire again today, while the fires in Idaho continue to burn. And you can just really watch the smoke trace this flow. And I just find that fascinating to keep an eye on. So a lot of upper atmosphere, air quality issues rolling through the Central Plains all the way down into the south as this broader trough of low pressure kind of just dips east and starts to exit. Now what that's going to do is it's going to leave a boundary sitting here. And we're going to come back to that in just a few moments when we look at the precipitation pattern. But I wanted to show you where the heat still sits with this pattern, because it's not in the west, it is not in the Midwest, it's not in the east, but it's still very much anchored down into Texas and into parts of Oklahoma where we have excessive heat warnings out for several counties down here, surrounded by heat advisories. So that is the pattern we're in right now, and that heat continues to keep a lot of the western side of the Cotton Belt with very, very high evaporation rates, in the Central Plains with high evaporation rates for this time of year. So these numbers are up here over 2.5 inches a week if there is moisture to evaporate. Now, I mentioned earlier that this pattern is starting to open back up to some moisture transport through this area. You can kind of see that on this particular graphic. So what you've got here shaded is CAPE, or convective available potential energy. It's the instability in the atmosphere. And later on today, we're keeping an eye on a couple of things. Okay, here's our large ridge that I think is quite temporary south of the Aleutian Islands. There's a couple of troughs here, but the overall upper atmosphere flow is doing this. And there's this draw on moisture that's right in through here, setting up parts of Montana, getting into the Dakotas with the risk for some severe storms. Some of the issues going on with the tropical season, including the suppression in this area, are also due to the fact we've got some very strong winds right now going across this part of the Caribbean. That's just way too strong to be able to develop any sort of a tropical system here. But the Bermuda High is still in place. I mean, there it is, coming around, and right in through this area is where the boundary is going to be stalling out over the next at least 7 to 10 days. And that's going to be a key part to where the heavy rains are going to be. Now, sometimes when we see this, we will watch for stuff to spin up on the tail end of that boundary. And I've been worried all season long about the Gulf of Mexico, right, as being a breeding ground for tropical systems. And even though none of the models are showing it right now, stalled out frontal boundaries in the Gulf of Mexico can initiate tropical storm development. So I just want you to be aware of that as we go forward in this forecast, knowing that I'm not confident anything is going to be there, but this is a recipe for it. So let's keep an eye out for that. So severe weather risk today, Montana. We just showed you the moisture returning there. The trigger points are going to be there. It's also going to be along the front range of the Rocky Mountains. Today we're going to watch for strong storms. Tomorrow, this moves toward eastern Montana through the Dakotas. You get out to the 22nd, that boundary is going to continue to slide east, giving us these risks of these storms. We're already watching some of them there this morning. Just kind of a live look at lightning here before sunrises in the central U.S. There's a few storms here in the plains that continue to go, like the remnants of one that are moving through parts of South Dakota. And then look here in parts of the Canadian Prairie, really the northern part of it, where there's still quite a bit of storms. And then your eyes probably drawn down here to the storms just sitting on that boundary offshore. And that's going to be a focal point to watch as we go forward in this forecast. So I liked the model initialization this morning. It did an okay job picking up on a few of these features. So let's just watch this. I'm going to play you out 2.5 days, and we're just going to do this quickly. Ready? You can see that Texas ridge, can't you? Look at the flow going over the top of it and the storms by tonight that just erupt right in this area. Some possibly some light rain moves out of the leftovers of the storm here in South Dakota and hits parts of Minnesota and Iowa. Again, pretty light rain. We then see again tomorrow where the storm's exploding, right here in the late afternoon and evening hour. And again, it's rolling around this upper level ridge. And we just play it out. And there's that stalled out frontal boundary that's just sitting right in this area on which we're going to see repeated chances for storms. And that's why these 7-day forecasts show those things, right? We just know the upper level flow is doing this, the surface flow or low level flow is doing that. So we get this corridor over which we see a lot of storms, and that extends into a big part of the Canadian Prairie. But it starts down here in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado. And if you're east of that, there's not a whole lot going on. It's going to be very difficult to get moisture into this entire area with this pattern. The front is too far to the south blocking it. That's what's going on here. Okay, that's a 7-day outlook from the WPC. This is a 7-day outlook from the National Blend of Models, and I'm going to do like I've been doing for the last few weeks. That's the 10-day. So not a lot of difference between the 7 and 10-day, but notice the NBM is quite, I don't know, it doesn't seem to have the, because we're blending so many models together, I don't think they have a lot of confidence in anything beyond 7 days as stuff starts to really spread out. But we're going to go look at the artificial intelligence. That's the 7 to 10, still picking up on this very active corridor. But again, look at this region and through here. That's expected dry. Now, these rainfall totals that you see over here in parts of the eastern Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley, this part of it, they still aren't very high. This is, this is a half inch, maybe a little bit more. We're going to keep an eye out on what could possibly sneak through there about 10 days from now with this broader trough that could initiate some of this rain, but it's pretty far out in the forecast. But again, Montana, parts of Saskatchewan, getting here into Manitoba, quite wet. A lot of storm activity. Front Range, Intermountain West, and again, the Pacific Northwest, and then where that boundary stalls out. I'm just going to say this again, even though I don't see any development, watch this area for the potential for something to spin up in it. If the wind shear calms down and we just get storms initiating, they'll start to take on low pressure and begin to spin around that low pressure. So just watch it with me. This is what the European model has, 7 days. That's out to 10. And here is the GFS 7 out to 10. And the GFS is a bit more aggressive on more widely scattered storms running the periphery of this ridge. But take a look. It's also trying to do something down here. See this? And that rain, if it gets into that area, is going to be critical. So I'm going to keep watching the Gulf of Mexico through the next 10 plus days, all right? But if we come back to it, I'm just going to focus now on who's drier. You saw who was wetter, who's drier in this pattern. There it is. We can see this region and through here continuing to show up on this side of the Rockies, missing out on this flow. Blocked Gulf moisture. We start off cool in this area like we are for the rest of this week, but by the weekend, the heat that's been in Texas begins to open up a bit more into the plains, into the Midwest. So we're going to see a big warm up in the temperatures, but we do have better chances here. Montana, of course, the Canadian Prairie, the northern plains, of getting some wetter conditions in. And of course, where that front is stalled, along the Gulf Coast and then into Florida, that's where we're seeing wetter. Now, I want you to think about this region specifically because over the last 30 days, there's been pockets that have been very, very dry. Notice we're on my color bar down here in the 0 to 30% range. And these, again, are these areas that are showing up on that soil moisture map without much soil moisture. While the southeast looks so incredibly wet, that was mostly from Debbie. These areas that are dry over the last 30 days, well, if you look at the last 14, they really begin to show up in a big way. Now, I know we had some heavy rains that got into pockets of Kansas and Oklahoma as of late, but not a lot of that's gotten much farther south or much farther east than that area. So a big section of our mid-south, I mean, just take a look at the western side of Kentucky and Tennessee and the northern parts of Mississippi and Alabama. This has been an area of recent flash drought development, given that the temperatures have been quite hot there as well. We continue to see the atmosphere has had a difficult time filling in this area with precipitation. So just to point out a few different areas here. So it's interesting. I got a message yesterday from some guys down in one in Louisiana and one in Texas. And the conversation was about, can you send us a weak hurricane? Because at this point, bringing that moisture in ahead of when it would be problematic, especially for the cotton crop, this would be nice to break this drought. But at this particular stage, I've been telling you now for a couple of weeks that after about the 25th, we got to start watching the open Atlantic. I may have to kick that down the road a little bit. I mean, I do see some tropical low pressure development here, but there's no real strong signal in the models for the next 10 days. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that this is a large area of upper atmosphere suppression. And despite the MJO trying to sneak out here and get over towards phase 3, 4, and 5, we talked about this a lot, right? The last few weeks, I don't see it being enough to kind of get over there and make that happen. And what's also important about this suppressing motion, look where it's sitting on top of. For the next 15 days, I'll just pick all the way out there to 15 days from now, it's sitting heavily on parts of South America. And we do expect as we get into September to get some signs of life in the South American monsoon, but as it stands, there's not a whole lot going on. We've got cool air advancing to the north, which means there's going to be a front parked here. But I think that's where the majority of this rainfall is going to come from, that front. See it there? This is in like the Paraná River Valley. This is in Uruguay, this part of Argentina, and building into very, very southern parts of Brazil. The monsoon is not back on yet. And I think there's going to be a lot of us that are just going to watch to see when that starts again. But if you have that much upper level suppression, there's no reason for it to get going anytime soon. So let's come back to the states, and I want to show you a couple things. The 8 to 14 day forecast continues to show mid-south, Midwest dryness. But take note that the European model started to pick up on some wetter conditions running this ridge as it opens up. So we'll keep an eye on that in this region. I did mention this a moment ago, but this is the 0Z GFS. Nope, GFS is over here. There's the European. Notice the snow that it's trying to put down here in the near term at very, very high elevation in the Rocky Mountains. I just thought you might want to see that. Okay, temperature-wise, this is today's high temperatures. So again, that is very reflective of that pattern, right? Look at this, just big ridge trying to open, deep trough. In fact, that's much deeper. It's all the way down here. Texas can't catch a break from this. There's Wednesday into Thursday. Whoa, jumped over a day. There's Thursday. Friday, Saturday. Look at that cold air. That's when the time frame could be that at very high elevation, we're getting some snow. It will be by Saturday that more of the plains and the Midwest, the Great Lakes into the Northeast start to see some of these warmer than average conditions. And it'll be there Sunday into Monday. But this trough that's creating this is expected to move next week. And this is what the day 5 through 10 looks like. There it is. That's the heat opening up. But day 10 through 15, see it coming back? And we've seen lots of models do this, dipping these big troughs into the west. Look at this P&A dropping like this. That's way down there. That's a west coast trough, and come right back. So if you get the P&A coming back positive by the time we finish this month, that's going to put a ridge in the west, and that's why we see these forecasts out there, day 10 through 15, cooling the Great Lakes and the surrounding states back off again. And we've seen that time and time and time again. And that is the reason why the west has maintained such warm conditions. We keep seeing these repeated shots of cooler air here. The ridge wants to back its way up to the west. Now, I've been blaming this on several things throughout this entire, year and or entire summer. And I just want to show you, I think, some more evidence to this. We have had, since we looked at the last 30 days or so, ridging that's kind of lived here in the low levels, and there's our Bermuda high. We've not had, a major surge of trade winds, even though they're there. These are not too much stronger than normal, indicating a weaker start to La Nina. But overall, we've seen this warm water resurge both here and here, meaning the upper levels of the atmosphere wanted to put ridges in place there and here. So the net effect is to drive flow in the upper levels of the atmosphere out of the northwest. And that's what's helped keep this cooler and more often than not put heat into the west. Now, right now, over the next several days, that's going to break down. It's going to break down temporarily, but it's going to try to go right back to what this look has given us. Now, there's one other thing I want to point out to you on this. If you notice just off the coast of South America, see the direction these winds are coming from? If you were just to look at the humidity profile here, there's very high humidity air here and very low humidity air there. So much more moist here and much drier there. And where's the source coming from? This is why the monsoon's not going yet. If it gets going, it'll come in around like this, and that'll be what drives the flow. So this is why we're still anticipating a much later start to the Brazilian monsoon this year. But ocean temperatures, there's your epicenters of heat. There's one here, there's one here, and there's one there. We have a few cold water trails from tropical systems right in through this area. And where we keep churning up deep low pressure in this area, you can see how cold the water is along the west coast of Alaska. But in terms of La Nina building, we are waiting on this area to see if later on this fall we get a stronger and stronger La Nina signal. At this point, I just don't see it there yet. It's just not an overwhelmingly strong signal. One other thing to point out, I do want to keep a close eye on this. This is your upper level height pattern. I usually show it to you earlier in the video, but we made a case a different way this time. There's your negative P&A that's going to get replaced with a big ridge soon. So this is the pattern by this weekend. Cold here, heat opening up in the midsection of the country, right? So see this guy though? Some of the models are predicting a typhoon again forming, moving toward Japan. There it is. And then what's interesting about it is, follow it quickly. It's here now. This is next Friday. It's expected to dive in and reinforce this trough. Now, the reason why I'm kind of going on about this is, do you remember the European weeklies saying the end of August and most of September was going to have high pressure here? And I kept calling it into question. This is it. It's not there. And that low is what's going to open up the west coast to a ridge. And that's going to drive troughs in through here, starting to cool things back off when you get out to the end of August and the beginning of September. See it? Look at that coming in there. So that'll be around the base of this, which is why those day 10 through 15 forecasts show cooler. It's all about the upstream pattern and also the big trough that's living out here in the North Atlantic. I think it's all one big connected system. Now back to those ocean temperatures as we finish this one up. La Nina continuing to kind of struggle to form. And I showed you this earlier, but the CPC did lower their forecast. They were up about 82%. They're now down around 75%. That middle of winter, late fall, early winter, it's got the highest probability of La Nina. They just ran yesterday their mid-month La Nina forecasts. And once again, they've now got almost equal chances of ENSO neutral conditions through winter versus La Nina. And what I'll be very, very curious to know is, by next spring, does ENSO neutral take back over? Because there's been some concern that if the La Nina comes in strong and sticks around and we cool off the west coast, that there could be a big drought next summer in the Midwest. But if we see this kind of transition, that takes me away from that major drought risk kind of forecast for next summer. And I'll keep monitoring that. That's nothing set in stone at all right now. But to finish this up, I do want to show you one other place in the world that's really worried about La Nina and its influence, and that's going to be South America. Now, right now, can't really call it a major influence on the pattern. I think a lot of the dryness you see here was initialization. In other words, we had a very dry season. Remember, we talked about that last week. And the models are just continuing that into the near term. And if you got flow coming like this and not like this, there's no early monsoon signal here. So the wet to the south is just parked along that frontal boundary we have right now. The dryness to the north is just an extension of the dry season. This gets you all the way out to October the 4th. But remember, October is the critical month for South America. So I'm going to keep watching this. I'm going to jump in the truck and head off to Indiana now. But y'all have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk tomorrow morning. Thanks.